Coming up on Bridge City News, RCMP revealed that they found the body of a third teenager who died in a boating accident on the St. Mary River earlier this month. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman stopped by our studio to discuss how the city has joined in a multi-billion-dollar class action lawsuit against Big Pharma. And the federal Conservative English leaders debate took place last night. We speak with political reporter Brian Lilly about who the winners and losers were.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Raymond McGrath, RCMP, confirmed that they found the body of a missing 17-year-old girl late yesterday afternoon. The teen, who was from the Spring Valley Hutterite colony, disappeared while out on a boating trip in the Spring Cooley area of St. Mary River on June 10th. Police say there were 3 teen girls in the canoe when it capsized. 1 girl drowned at the scene and the other 2 were swept away by raging waters. The body of 1 girl was found the next day, and yesterday police and EMS found the 3rd body. The names of the teens are not being released. Lethbridge police have charged a 20-year-old woman with fleeing from them, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer. The LPS say around 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday, they noticed an SUV with no headlights at an intersection in North Lethbridge. When they approached the vehicle, the female driver and her passenger took off down a back alley. They say the 2 women then fled from the vehicle on foot. A K-9 unit was brought in to help with their arrest. The driver of the vehicle elbowed an officer and then spit in his face. Police then put a spit mask on her when she was arrested. It turns out the driver, who only had a Class 7 license, also had a blood alcohol level over 0.3. 20-year-old Kosovar Ajdini faces numerous charges and will appear in court on September 22nd. On June 14th, torrential hail and rain came down on the towns of Tabor and Barnwell. It affected local farmers who were in the middle of their growing season for corn and potatoes. As Micah Quinnick reports, one farming family says the hail caused widespread damage to their fields, but this is just one more issue they're having to deal with.
This is the aftermath of a violent hailstorm that struck the fields owned by Johnson Fresh Farms on June 14th. Joe Johnson is a 4th-generation farmer, and he works with his brothers and father. He says that this was a big blow to their fields.
So this corn here was planted about April 22nd. It was looking like an awesome crop. It was about this tall before the storm rolled in, and you can see the hailstones has shredded the leaves completely.
The fields were hit with golf ball-sized hail this past weekend, and now 3 of the 7 fields are a complete write-off.
The one that hit us was one about a half hour later, much more severe and intense. It rolled through, it affected about 250 acres of our crops, most of that being corn.
The company also had a bad hailstorm last year.
Not as bad as the August 6th storm for us. Still a lot of damage, and probably in my lifetime the 2nd worst hailstorm I've seen or witnessed.
The farmers thankfully had insurance this year,
which will help out a little bit, but you can't run a successful business on collecting insurance every year. So
Johnson says weather is a part of the game of farming, and all they can do is assess the damage and try to make changes to stay successful. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The COVID-19 pandemic closed the Canada-U.S. border to non-essential travel on March 21st, and it still remains shut down until at least July 21st. As BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly explains now, not having access to those American tourist dollars has been tough for some business owners at one south border town here in Alberta.
Warner County hasn't recorded a single case of COVID-19, and Village of Cootes Mayor Jim Willett wants to keep it that way.
I see the haphazard way that most of the states have approached it. They're opening up before they're ready to. Montana's a good example probably. The last few days they've been getting 15, 20 cases for the last 3 days now.
Before the pandemic, business owners were used to seeing thousands of vehicles crossing the border daily. They admit that things have picked up recently, but restrictions on non-essential travel for Albertans likely won't be lifted until Phase 3 of the province's relaunch plan. The federal government has extended the border closure until July 21st.
We're just used to seeing lineups all the time. So it's just sort of been weird just to not have that traffic go through, because we're right here, we can see it, so.
It's like feast or famine, and that's the way it goes in these small towns and border towns here. And if it keeps going, there's probably nothing left of the border town, because what else do you survive on but the traffic going up and down the road here. So hopefully things will slow down and go back to normal here soon.
Both business owners and city officials say that their already tight-knit community has found a way to tackle these difficult times together.
This separation has actually brought us all closer, if you can get around that.
During this time, I think that's been a huge part of what's gone on in this community, is people have just been very supportive of one of another, and it's just been a great time as far as seeing people come together and stuff. But at this point, I think everybody's ready to kind of move on, but I know I am.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Graduates from Chinook High School in Lethbridge got to walk across the stage in front of friends and family earlier today. They did so, but not in a typical fashion due to COVID-19 restrictions. BCN's Loris Alexander explains.
Because we are unable to host an indoor event with just the numbers of students and families that we have at Chinook, we felt it was important to still have an opportunity for our families and our students to bear witness to their children plus other students in the school to cross the stage. So we are doing a drive-in style convocation.
There will be approximately 300 grads broken into groups of 40. So 6 separate convocations that run an hour in length each.
There won't be anything to hand out, no diplomas or anything like that. Students already received those things from their advisors, but still an opportunity to cross the stage and have mom and dad honk their horn and have that proud moment for their son or their daughter, who we know for the last 4 years have worked so hard.
It's a great honor, of course. It's a special honor this year with the pandemic, especially because most graduating students this year around the world do not have the opportunity to go to a ceremony.
Tana says the only missed opportunity is all of the class graduating together. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A story we've been following on BCN is how the city of Lethbridge has decided to join in the $10 billion class action lawsuit against big pharmaceutical companies. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman stopped by our studio recently and says if any city has a major opioid problem, it's Lethbridge. He says a real challenge is preventing the drugs from blowing into the Windy City.
Our crime suppression team from Lethbridge Police Services is doing a tremendous job. They've had a lot of successes, but the supply of drugs is just unrelenting. And with a closed border, the drugs are still getting through.
Catch the full interview with Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman, also discussing how the city is going after the 2022 Briar. That is coming up in the second half of our show. Lethbridge City Hall will be reopening to the public in a limited capacity on Monday. City officials say only services on the first floor will be open. The foyer will have directions in place for the purpose of your visit, as well for physical distancing and one-way foot traffic. The public washrooms will also be open, and extra hand sanitizer stations will have been set up. The Government of Alberta announced today that it has awarded $200 million in grants to municipalities. Officials say the money will go towards upgrading bridges, roads, airports, along with making improvements to water supply and treatment facilities. The additional grant funding will support around 1,800 jobs in communities around the province. The province announced today that there were 46 new COVID-19 cases in Alberta. Fortunately, there were no new deaths. Provincial Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says close to 7,000 Albertans have now recovered from the virus. There are currently only 512 active cases, with 39 people in hospital, many in the Edmonton region. Henshaw says recent data is showing some positive trends.
Most of the active cases in Alberta right now are from a known source. That's positive, as it means we can stop the spread faster. There are also now only 26 active cases in continuing care facilities, with more than 708 recovered cases across the province. So far, we have not seen outbreaks or significant transmission related to any outdoor activities. These are all positive signs.
An independent school in BC's Fraser Valley confirms that a staff member there has tested positive for COVID-19. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry says they expected to see the virus in schools.
Public health teams have investigated, and they are continuing that investigation, but a small number of close contacts have been notified, and no children have been involved. And as a precaution, the school has stopped their in-class learning for the balance of the year. There were no contacts that were of concern with children in the setting, and this is not unexpected. When we went into opening up the in-classroom schools at the beginning of June, we knew that public health, we were paying attention to this, and that it was very possible that somebody would bring the virus to the school setting with them.
Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, says Canada had the highest number of tests in a single week since the COVID-19 pandemic began. She says despite the high level of testing, the total number of new cases continues to decline.
It has been 100 days since Canada reported its 100th person with COVID-19, and we now have over 100,000 cases. This is a moment to reflect. Over the past week, we saw an average of fewer than 400 new cases reported daily, which is less than a quarter of the over 1,700 cases reported daily during the peak of the epidemic in late April. Nationally, we tested over 254,000 people across the country this past week alone, which is the highest number of people tested in any 1 week to date. Yet, despite the high level of testing, national case counts continue to decline, so this is good news.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada is disappointed that China has officially charged 2 Canadian citizens with spying. He says he will continue to push for the release of both Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. They were both detained by Chinese authorities following the December 18th arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou.
We are, of course, disappointed with the decision and the next step taken by the Chinese in the case of the 2 Michaels, and we offer all our support and sympathies to the families of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who are obviously living a difficult moment today, as they have been for well over a year with the arbitrary detention of 2 Canadian citizens. We have continued to express our disappointment with the Chinese decision, with the Chinese detention of these 2 Canadians. We will continue to advocate for their release, for their return to Canada.
Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery in the United States, is gaining new prominence this year amid racial justice protests sparked by the death of George Floyd while in police custody.
It was June 19th, 1865, when slaves in Galveston, Texas, found out from Union troops that the Civil War was over and they were freed. They started celebrating, and their descendants moved that celebration out of Galveston, Texas, to around Texas, around the United States, and now around the world.
Black Lives Matter.
The Black Lives Matter movement and the protests around the death of George Floyd has brought racial equality to the forefront of the conversation in the United States.
The historic event, which ended slavery in the United States, Juneteenth, has taken on renewed significance this year. Many activists, including some here in Lethbridge, are speaking out.
It's sad that a person has to be killed again to finally get notice. But the only reason that they got notice is because there was a camera there. I can't breathe. And those days when I was growing up, that I got chased or beat up because I was in the wrong neighborhood. There was no cell phones. And the police took the white person's side. So Juneteenth, we look at it as this is a celebration.
Federal Conservative leadership hopefuls talked about the issue of systemic racism in Canada during their second debate last night. While Peter MacKay, Derek Sloan, Leslyn Lewis all spoke out against the issue, Aaron O'Toole would not say whether he believes it actually exists.
Systemic racism is deeply rooted in institutions that perpetrate and allow racism to go on. What we heard coming from the commissioner of the RCMP was an acknowledgement that that institution, amongst others, and more broadly our justice system that you spoke of, has to improve.
When we're talking about, Indigenous people who are more likely to be convicted and receive longer sentences and so on, there is no specific law that says convict them more often, give them longer sentences. It has to do with the person, the jury, or the person sitting behind the bench.
I think we owe it to Canada to make sure we remain the best country in the world, and we stamp out any instances of racism, unfairness, discrimination, and have a commitment to that. I've tried to have a commitment to that as a public official, and there's got to be a zero tolerance approach, and I will have that approach.
Yes, I believe that we have to look at the outcomes of certain systems, and that tells you whether or not there is systemic racism. Many people misinterpret what systemic racism is, and so many people think that, oh, Canadians are not racist, and the majority of Canadians are not racist. But that is not the marker that we use to define whether or not there's systemic racism. These are tacit, implicit practices that lead to unequal outcomes. And so we know that in certain institutions that these outcomes are there.
Political analyst Brian Lilly watched the debate last night and gave us his take as to who won.
Objectively, did anyone win the English language debate for the Conservative leadership? I'd have to say no. Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole are still struggling for the top spot, and they were very close in this debate. Both showcased themselves well, both showed why they've been successful politicians as long as they have been, but neither bested the other. So the competition continues. Now, Leslyn Lewis has been impressing many people who got their first real glimpse of her. She gave good answers, but she also may have shown that while she's smart, competent, and very exciting, she may not be ready for the top job. She needs more experience in politics and in talking to people. And Derek Sloan, he had a chance to introduce himself to a wider audience and break out of his social conservative stronghold. He didn't do that. He did perform well, but he often threw out comments on fringe issues like being against mandatory vaccines, something we don't even have in Canada. People upset, really upset about that issue, they're likely already with him. Bottom line, this continues to be a battle for first between O'Toole and MacKay. Lewis gained ground, but Sloan, he's well back and forth.
Now, closer to home, the Movie Mill is open once again, but in a limited capacity. It is featuring some great new releases along with some past summer blockbusters. With more, here's Len Binning with another Movie Mill Minute.
You may ask yourself, what movies are available? Hollywood hasn't put anything out in 3 months' time. Well, we're working hard to solve that problem. We've dug deep into the vault and we're bringing back classics such as Jaws, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park 1 and 2, E.T., the list goes on. But we've found newer product as well, including Sonic the Hedgehog, Trolls World Tour, My Spy, and Bad Boys for Life starring Will Smith.
In these streets, I never trusted anybody but you. I'm asking you, man. Bad Boys.
One last time. One last time. If you're wondering what's different when you come back, you'll be greeted with hand sanitizer. You'll see plexiglass at selling stations. You'll see our staff in masks and or visors. We've spread out our show times and we reduced our seating capacity to 35% to enable social distancing. As an added incentive, now that school's out, we've added children's pricing. So if you're under the age of 14, tickets are just $3 all summer long. And Sundays to Thursdays, we have $10 packages available that includes your pop, your popcorn, and your movies. Check our social media out on Instagram, Facebook, and our website at www.moviemill.com.
Nice to see the Movie Mill open once again. It is shaping up to potentially be a bit of a soggy Father's Day weekend, a great time to maybe catch a movie or two. Complete weather details are coming up. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, hopefully lots of sunshine for Father's Day weekend, but apparently there's also a chance of some moisture.
Yeah, probably not quite as much sunshine as we were initially hoping for. Looking into this evening, we are going to be seeing a 60% chance of showers still later on tonight with a risk of a thunderstorm. 8 degrees is the overnight low, and into tomorrow, Saturday, we are going to start the day a little bit sunny, and then it looks like more in the afternoon, those clouds are going to roll in. We could see a 30% chance of showers. There is a risk of a late afternoon thunderstorm on our Saturday. 23 is the high tomorrow, 13 degrees is the overnight low on Saturday evening. And then as we look into Sunday, Father's Day, we could see a 30% chance of showers for Father's Day. Sorry, dads. 22 degrees is the high, though, and then as we look into, of course, the beginning of next week, that's when we're going to see the sunshine and the temperatures rise. 23 is the high for Monday, sunshine. Sunny skies for Tuesday, 28 is that high there, 27 for Wednesday and Thursday with a mix of sun and cloud. We are kind of seeing those temperatures starting to rise until late next week. So that is going to be above average for this time of year. And according to the almanac, 23 degrees is the average for this time of year right now. The average low is 9 degrees. 33 was the highest temperature on this day back in 1985. And the lowest temperature was 1. That was in 2004. Now look at this. Our sun rose this morning at 5:23 a.m. and our evening sunset tonight, 9:42 p.m. as we are getting closer to that summer solstice, which happens this weekend. So actually on Saturday, June 20th is the longest day of the year. Looking to the west coast, Victoria, high 22. They could see some showers expected also in Vancouver. 21 the high. Edmonton's getting the sunshine tomorrow. 23 is their high. Calgary's weather will look very similar to Lethbridge, high of 23. They could see that chance of showers and possibility of thunderstorms in the afternoon. Mix of sun and cloud expected for Saskatoon. 18 is the high. 20 for Regina under semi-cloudy skies there. Same thing for Winnipeg, and they could see a 30% chance of showers as well later on in the afternoon. As we get further east, this is where all the heat activity is happening in the country. 30 degrees expected for Toronto under sunny skies. Look at these temperatures for Ottawa and Montreal. This whole area is under a heat warning. So that's for Ottawa, Montreal, Fredericton, and Halifax. Those heat indexes are very high, humidex. That's going to make those temperatures feel more like close to 35 and 40 degrees for this area. Charlottetown's high, 17 degrees under sunny skies. And St. John's is getting the chillier weather with the drizzle, so they could see temps as low as 9 degrees tomorrow. There you go, that is your weather.
Mid-sized Canadian businesses that are strapped for cash because of COVID-19 can now access multi-million-dollar loans from the federal government and their banks. They will be administered by the Business Development Bank of Canada. The program is open to companies from any economic sector. Some of the qualifying terms include that revenues must be between $100 and $500 million before the pandemic. That is when they saw operations affected by the economic shutdown or falling oil and gas prices. Ontario has passed legislation to protect farmers from animal rights activists who trespass on their property. The legislation will hike fines for trespassing on farms and food processing facilities and makes it illegal to obstruct trucks carrying farm animals. The fines for trespassing will be up to $15,000 for a first offense compared to the previous maximum, which was $10,000. Government officials say the bill will help ensure the security of the province's food supply. It was applauded by farmers, but blasted by animal rights activists who say the bill targets them. TELUS says its fifth-generation wireless network will be activated in 5 of Canada's largest markets starting today. It says another 26 will be added by the end of the year. It also says Samsung has been added to its list of 5G network equipment suppliers, in addition to Nokia and Ericsson. The announcement is further evidence that carriers are not waiting to see if China-based Huawei will be banned from their 5G networks. The TELUS 5G network will initially be available in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 5 points on the day to finish at 15,474. The Dow was down 208 points to 25,871. The S&P 500 was down 17 points on the day to 3,097, and the Nasdaq was up 3 points to 99.46. Oil was up 59 cents to 39.43 per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to $1.67. Gold was up $20.94 to $17.4387 an ounce, and silver was up 24 cents to $17.62 an ounce. Wheat is at $245 per metric ton, barley's at $248, canola's at $474, and corn is at $233 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.38 to $94.70, feeder cattle were down 43 cents to $132.55, and lean hogs were down $1.45 to $48.45. The Canadian dollar was unchanged at 73.49 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Raymond McGrath RCMP confirmed that they found the body of a missing 17-year-old girl late yesterday afternoon. The teen, who was from the Spring Valley Hutterite colony, disappeared while out on a boating trip in the Spring Cooley area of St. Mary River on June 10th. Police say there were 3 teen girls in the canoe when it capsized. 1 girl drowned at the scene and the other 2 were swept away by raging waters. The body of 1 girl was found the next day, and yesterday, police and EMS found the 3rd body. The names of the teens are not being released. The City of Lethbridge is joining in on a $10 billion class action lawsuit against pharmaceutical companies. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman stopped by our studio to explain why. We'll have that interview for you in just a moment. Lethbridge City Council voted 7-2 to go ahead with a bid for the 2022 Brier. Now, if the city was to land the event, it would be great news for both curling fans and business owners alike. To discuss this in more detail is the Mayor of Lethbridge, Chris Spearman, joins me once again here in studio. Welcome back to BCN.
Happy to be here, Hal.
It's wonderful. Now let's talk about landing the Brier. Would bring some big bucks to the city, but at the same time, you got to spend a little bit of money too, don't you? You have to spend money to make money.
Yeah, so it's $1 million, but that's about $650,000 in cash, about $350,000 in-kind services. You only pay that if you are successful. And it looks like a tremendous thing to host. The television coverage is probably better than the Memorial Cup. There's a full week of coverage, national coverage. Every province is represented, and the territories as well. So great television coverage, great exposure for the city of Lethbridge. For $1 million, the previous hosts have generally gained about another $10 to $15 million in business revenue for the city. So those cities, the restaurants and their hotels are full for a week, and that would be a tremendous event for City of Lethbridge to host.
2 councillors, though, Belinda Crowson was one of them, said, you know what, that $1 million could be better spent elsewhere. So how do you respond to that?
We always make those kind of decisions, and they're not always unanimous. What are the city's priorities? In this case, the idea was, how can we stimulate the economy after the COVID recovery?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, what are some of the criteria for actually landing the Brier? And who are some of our biggest competition then, 2022?
Well, Curling Canada would evaluate the various bids, but certainly what's the...
Look at the facilities here, right?
Yeah, facilities are good. What's the past reputation of the city in terms of curling? So we've hosted the Scotties twice. We've hosted the World Men's. We've hosted the World Mixed qualifications. We have a great reputation for supporting curling events and a great venue to host them.
Now, Council also voted to cancel the $1.75 million 6-mile Cooley pathway project recently. And why was that?
Generally, we were hearing from the community that the people who are currently using that pathway didn't want the improvements that were proposed. So specifically the shale pathways.
So the limestone, I guess?
Yeah, the limestone.
Right.
We thought there needed to be more consultation, so we put the project on the shelf while that consultation takes place. So there seems to be some miscommunication. Our administration said there was consultation, but certainly we had an avalanche of complaints. At the same time, we have to balance the nature and the purpose of the river valley and make sure that we're not harming the river valley. And we have to address safety issues. If it's a city pathway, what's the state of the bridges? What's the state of all the infrastructure along there? So can people use it safely? We certainly don't want to be in a situation where people get hurt using the pathway.
The province announced the launching of phase 2 of the economy, relaunching the economy here. A lot of business owners I've spoken with said we should have relaunched like a month ago already. They're finding it very difficult. But then some other business owners are saying, well, hold off. We're going to actually wait another few more weeks before we reopen, because they're a little concerned about a second wave. What are you hearing right now?
Well, nobody wants a second wave. The worst thing that could happen to us in the city of Lethbridge is that we go backwards. So there's a lot of concern with past viruses about a second wave, and of course there is no cure, there's no inoculation, and the virus has not gone away. We still have live cases, a small number of them, each week in the city of Lethbridge. But what we want to do is make sure the community is safe, that we follow the guidelines from the medical officer of health, that we ensure that we keep each other safe and prevent a flare-up or a recurrence. We're very concerned about what might be happening in the fall, and we want to make sure that businesses open and stay open. We want to make sure community facilities open and stay open, and we need to put processes and procedures in place to make sure everyone stays safe.
What do you want to say to that business owner that didn't survive the COVID-19 pandemic and had to shut their doors here in Lethbridge? What do you want to say to them specifically?
That's a tough one. And, we are trying to do the best we can to support businesses and make sure everybody survives. We hope that people will continue to invest and maintain their businesses, and we'll be looking at ways. So we have a committee looking at ways to support businesses going forward.
Municipalities obviously are hurting right now across the province. Council recently passed a motion supported by the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association to approve a 1% provincial sales tax to support local capital projects. Many Albertans I've spoken with, though, Chris, are dead set against a PST. To say, where's the Alberta advantage? There's no provincial sales tax. This is Alberta.
Yep. So the provincial government is looking at phasing out the Municipal Sustainability Initiative, which is funding that goes to municipalities to fund capital projects. Mm-hmm. So there's no commitment beyond 2021. So what's an alternative to that? So the motion that was proposed and passed at City Council is that instead there could be a 1% sales tax. Now that motion is only passed at Lethbridge City Council for us to take that resolution forward and discuss it at the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association annual convention. It would have to be passed by all member municipalities. It is basically a point for discussion. It's a philosophical discussion. How do municipalities acquire money for capital projects going forward?
What are some of the big capital projects right now that we should really address and attack?
Well, what we're looking at is catalytic economic projects. So things like the Lethbridge Exhibition Project, the airport project, funding.
Another bridge to the west side?
Broadband. The ROI on a bridge to the west side is zero, but and the cost only $250.
Well, not for you and I. We live on the west side. Come on.
Yep. Okay. But that'll be a challenge, I think.
I know.
I think now that people have learned that many people in the city can work at home and do that type of thing. We might have pushed off the third bridge from 2030 to 2040.
Right. So. Okay. Let's talk about this $10 billion class action lawsuit against Big Pharma that the city of Lethbridge is joining in on. Why did you decide to join the party?
Well, municipalities are actually in by default, but we may be able to offer our own experience here. There hasn't been a city in Alberta that was more negatively affected than Lethbridge by the opioid crisis. So we had learned experience through our ELCOU group. We talked to people who were addicts, and they didn't want to be addicts. Some of them were sports athletes who had incurred injuries, and they were given painkillers to deal with it. And then when the prescription stopped, they were addicted. And then we had other people who had workplace injuries and had been encouraged by the WCB to go back to work and were given painkillers, and they were addicted. So we have a lived experience here.
And a lot of seniors too were dealing with
Yep,
osteoarthritis.
Yep. They were given painkillers. So we have seniors who were addicts as well. So the drug companies provided these drugs. The physicians were encouraged to prescribe them, and we have a unique lived experience in the city of Lethbridge, which could be beneficial to a lawsuit. So we we'll investigate the possibility of becoming a co-plaintiff with the city of Grand Prairie in Alberta and offer that personal experience to those providing the lawsuit.
Now, last time we chatted, the province was pitching in with some funding to really help attack the opioid crisis in our city. COVID is one thing, but there's still a drug crisis in our city. How's that coming in regards to the intox and detox beds?
Well, probably coming a little slower than I would like. We're hoping that the supported housing project will be moving forward shortly. That's an $11 million project to house people who are chronic addicts, people who have mental health issues that they will never overcome. Those types of, so we need to accommodate those people, but we need people to move from addiction into recovery. Certainly a big challenge in terms of people recovering from addiction and turning the corner on that. We're seeing some troubling trends this year in terms of what's happening with the drugs. The drugs are getting stronger. They're seeing more fatal overdoses across the country.
Well, From fentanyl to carfentanil, also meth last time we spoke. That's become a real issue in our city as well.
With the border closed, the drug supply is different, and they're seeing much stronger drugs. So many more responses in terms of overdoses, and people are using out in the community, which is high risk. So we're seeing people. We've had a death in a West Side park. With the summer weather here, we can anticipate there will be more drug use out in the communities, and that's a challenge going forward.
How can we really prevent those drugs from entering our city, even coming into the city?
Our crime suppression team from Lethbridge Police Services is doing a tremendous job. They've had a lot of successes, but the supply of drugs is just unrelenting. And with a closed border, the drugs are still getting through.
How about a full-time scan unit? Last time we chatted as well, it would be nice to have that here. And so once we shut down those drug houses, they're shut down permanently, and we don't have another one pop up, 3 houses over?
Yeah, it would be great to have a full-time scan unit here, but so far the province hasn't approved that. They're still based out of Edmonton and Calgary, and the province is preferring to use a program called Alert, where police services work together, and but we certainly need the capacity to shut down drug houses in the city of Lethbridge.
What have you heard from the province in regards to the supervised consumption site at Arches? Have they given any indication so far about moving or shutting it down entirely?
That announcement is entirely within the province's purview, and
have they given you any indication, though? Have they
we're anticipating a decision later. Their focus is definitely on funding recovery rather than harm reduction. So we have actually 5 facilities in the city of Lethbridge that provide various forms of recovery, and they're all underutilized. And it's about the approach that's taken, I think. I think there needs to be new ways of addressing and encouraging people to leave addiction. They basically need a fresh start.
Some politicians I've spoken with when I used to work in Parliament Hill in Ottawa say, we'd love to see all drugs decriminalized, not legalized, but decriminalized in Canada. What would you think of that kind of a philosophy? A similar model to what they have in Portugal.
It would be controversial for sure. If the federal government provided the drugs, the crime issue would go away. That's the advantage of that program. People wouldn't have to steal. There would be, if they could get the drugs and they could be supervised while they were using them, and then they could be weaned off the drugs, that would be an approach to be considered. But that is, again, we're dealing with the side effects, and the responsibility for solving the issue and coming up with the solutions really belongs to the provincial and federal government.
The Alberta Taxpayers Federation recently came out with a list of some of the cities, municipalities, where they're spending a lot per person. Medicine Hat was number 1. I think Lethbridge came in around number 3. Why are we spending so much per person here? Where can we maybe trim the fat a little bit?
We provide a high level of service. So the challenge is we have a police service, for example, rather than the RCMP. There's a higher cost to having your own police force. Medicine Hat has their own police force. In Medicine Hat's case, they provide additional utilities that the City of Lethbridge doesn't, so they are high on the list because they provide a gas utility. We also have tremendous facilities, so I think we have the second biggest recreational facility in the province with the ATB Centre. There are costs to provide those levels of services. We have more parks per capita, maintained parks per capita than other cities, so there's a cost to maintaining parks. We're doing our best to control costs. 2020 will be the first year in 20 years when there's been a 0 tax increase in the city of Lethbridge, and we have implemented the KPMG reviews, the operational reviews, to see where we can find efficiencies in all the departments across the city. And we're hoping to have additional recommendations so that next year we'll be looking at ways to minimize the possibility of a tax increase in 2021.
How about potentially putting more money into the police service as well in dealing with a lot of the drug and crime issues in our city?
We have provided additional funds to the police for 3 new programs in the current budget, but certainly there's pushback across North America about how much policing is costing. So policing is about 22-23% of our total municipal tax budget, and certainly People are saying, should it be so high? Is there another way to address the issues? So,
and what about the Watch program? Is that really making a difference in our community?
I believe that it is. It's one of the innovative programs that was brought in. They have worked with the community. They have helped identify overdoses, provided supports. So that too is controversial in the city at the moment, and the Watch program funding expires at the end of 2020, and council will have to make a decision as to whether we would continue that.
The local state of emergency is officially over here in Lethbridge, so that's good news. How did you come to that point?
We got to the point now that we have flattened the curve in Lethbridge, and that's happened across the province. The province has removed their state of emergency, and so we've done that in Lethbridge. And what that allowed us to do was acquire facilities. Those decisions were made by the Director of Emergency Services and the Emergency Response Committee. So in order to access facilities, provided an additional homeless shelter and make sure that people could be safely social distanced, we needed to acquire facilities. And so those decisions had to be made quickly. There was no political involvement in those decisions, but that's what state of local emergency does.
And I noticed too that the homeless shelter is leaving the Fritz Sick Gymnasium and going back to 2nd Avenue North, which is good too. Let's talk about how the city decides when to reopen some of the spray parks and some of the other areas as well, like the ATB Center and even the Cor Van Ray YMCA swimming pool. I mean, I guess, going to take a while to fill that pool.
Yep.
But, we're looking like mid-July, maybe at the earliest. It's still a ways off.
Yeah, I think I've heard dates like July the 11th.
Right.
And, what we want to do is get those facilities open as quickly as possible, but we have to have the procedures in place. And many in the community are frustrated. We opened up the parks and people said, well, why aren't the washrooms open? Well, we don't have the staff to go and clean the washrooms after every use. We need to make sure we have put procedures in place and let people know that they have to be responsible. They have to make sure that they are safe, their kids are safe, that people understand the rules. So when it comes to opening up a spray park, there will be rules and regulations. It just won't be business as usual.
So social distancing is still very important?
People will have to social distance. People will have to supervise their children because 4-year-olds don't social distance very well. And, that's just things we need to make sure that the responsibilities are outlined very carefully in order to make sure that we don't have risks of further pandemic and spreading of the virus.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's funny when you talk about the kids social distancing. I remember Timbits hockey. They look like all together on the ice going around. And when they play soccer as well, they're not spread out. They're all in a nice little group together. And that's the way it was meant to be. Mayor Chris Spearman, thanks so much for joining me in studio again today.
Always great to be here, Hal.
The COVID-19 pandemic has hit our economy very hard, including our agriculture industry. Will the food supply chain remain safe? Is the government offering sufficient financial aid for farmers and producers? To talk more about it is today's guest, Mark Fournier. He's an instructor at the Workland School of Agricultural Technology at Olds College in Alberta. Mark, welcome to BCN.
Thanks for having me on, Hal.
Now, the recent COVID outbreaks in meat packing plants has caused some of them to shut down temporarily. How did that really impact pricing for beef and pork?
Well, we've seen prices go up at the supermarket, but we've seen, unfortunately, prices go down for our livestock producers. We actually have an excess of supply right now. Going into March, we actually had about 9% excess supply of beef at that point in time. So we can see prices continuing to decrease there. On the pork side, actually we're tied to the States on this one. We're doing pretty good with our supply, but because the United States had an excess supply as a result of COVID-19, we've seen that funnel over the border here, which has had a dramatic increase on hog prices. So for our producers, hog prices are going down as well.
How will the COVID-19 pandemic really affect producers in the long term?
Well, in the long term, we're going to have to wait and see. This has been a year that we did not expect, obviously. So there's been so many changes, rapid changes to our economy, to the sector, that we're waiting to see what the flow through is going to be. There are some bright side of things, and one of which is that our supply chain seems to be working quite well. So what we need to wait and see is how things are going to change as we open up. What's the economy going to be like? We know it's going to be down over previous years, But how is that going to flow through to the ag industry, to the individual producers, and ultimately the consumers? We're all waiting to see that one.
Now, many feedlot operators and ranchers say although the government has provided some financial aid, it's not nearly enough. Ottawa promised $252 million. How much more is needed, and what will the money go towards?
Well, there's a lot of different programs that are being announced right now, and I always like to say we have to look through the forest to see the trees. So we hear of these hundreds of millions of dollars that are being allocated for the ag sector. That's wonderful. It's great to hear that. Obviously, the ag sector needs it. But if we look at our friends and our neighbors, our producers, how are they going to see those dollars? So when I take a look at the funding programs that are coming out, we can see that there's national programs, there's provincial programs. I like to see the different ones that are coming to the different sectors, but I look at FCC. FCC has increased their lending programs, which is wonderful to see. We can see that AFSC is bringing in some new programs for producers as well. And on the government level, they're tapping into and complementing what's happening at the federal level, and they're also bringing in some programs that'll help with the perceived labor shortage here over the next little while.
Some say that with the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, many nations will continue to protect their borders and put stricter limits on trade. Mark, that would in turn affect Canadian producers who need to export livestock and grains. What are you hearing from the ag sector?
Well, actually, that's completely true. What we're seeing is a thickening of the border, and this is very common when there's different pandemics or economic shocks. People start to protect themselves, different countries protect themselves, and that's something that we can expect to see. So the border is definitely being thickened. People are looking at protecting their own backyard first and foremost. But we're very fortunate that the supply chain, as just mentioned, is open. The border, while people aren't going back and forth, there's still the transfer of goods and services across the border. So that is positive, and waiting to see what's going to happen here with China for the next little while should have a big impact as well. As you saw maybe today that with the Huawei ruling that came down, unfortunately didn't go China's way. So are we going to see more retaliatory tariffs and retaliatory actions coming in from China? We're going to have to wait and see. We have a election going on south of the border. So is that going to impact our exports? We're going to have to wait and see. So I do expect things to be thicker, the border to be a little bit thicker than it has been for the last few years, but we still enjoy good relations with our friends here in North America. So I do think we'll still continue to see some exports.
Now, there have been some complaints from grain farmers that they were left out of the federal aid package for farmers. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's one I completely agree with. If you take a look at the grain farmers of Ontario, they've recently done a study, and they stated that almost 90% of their members are already seeing a decrease in income. Their members are also stating that a lot of contracts are being canceled right now, and we're only 5 months into the year, we're only a couple months into the growing season. We're seeing an increase in input prices and a lot of uncertainty. And so when we take a look at the grain sector, are they going to feel this? Absolutely they are. It's just not as fast as we've seen it on the livestock side of things. So I did like what they put forward, in that they would like to see some improvements to risk management programs. They'd like to see some improvements to agri-stability, some improvements to agri-invest. So there's some options that can be taken both at the provincial and federal level. So I think the grain producers are spot on that one.
Now, there's been some talk of producers deciding not to plant a crop this year and simply riding out the season. Do you know of any producers who've actually gone through with that?
I can say no on that one. Here in central Alberta, the last 4 weeks, we've seen our producers have to take off the last of harvest 2019 and then immediately turn around and put on seeding 2020. So the producers around here have been pretty busy as is, and I haven't had anybody state that they're not going to put a crop on. The people I've talked to are worried, obviously, but they're putting their ducks in a row, as you will, and are hoping for the best.
Some say that Canada's food supply could actually be threatened by this pandemic if the ag sector doesn't get the help that it needs. Is that possible?
I'm going to say no on that one. One thing we're very lucky to see is that we do have a very robust system. We have seen a decrease in some, well, not even the supply, we've seen a decrease in supply at the retail level. And we've seen an increase in supply at the producer level, obviously, which is why we're seeing more livestock inventory and hog inventory right now. I think a lot of people are concerned because for the first time in a generation, we've gone to the grocery store and we've seen empty aisles. Started with the toilet paper, then went on to the flour. Now we're going on to the meat, the chicken and the beef there. And in each case, the paper producers were saying, no, we've got plenty. When we saw the flour, we were being told, no, we have plenty. It was just the bags that were in demand at that point in time. And if we take a look at what's going on right now with poultry, for example, they've got an ample supply. They need more capacity to store the supply that they have. Our system for the last 15, 20 years has been a just-in-time inventory system. So we're used to getting, we want fresh meat. We're used to getting meat a day or so after the previous load was cleared out. And now people being people are starting to purchase in bulk more than they have in the past. People are starting to fill their freezers more because of the uncertainty. And of course, that's led to an increase in demand, short-term at least, for the meat that we're seeing at the grocery store. So there is concern over this. But because of the robustness of our system and the supplies that we have in place, I think it's more of a production concern than a consumer concern. So from everything I've been seeing, no, there's no major concerns at this point in time.
With so many restaurants closing down, Mark, how has this really affected potato farmers and others who would normally be providing food for the restaurant sector?
Well, I was in a seminar here the other day, and what I was told is that of the average household, for their food budget, 30% of that budget goes to eating out, goes to the restaurants. And that came to a very abrupt closure here back in March. So obviously that led to some changes there. But as we see things opening up, we're not seeing people return to restaurants at the same capacity. They can't come back in the same capacity as when they closed. I had the pleasure of visiting a restaurant here this past weekend. Only about 1/3 of the tables were open up. So is there going to be a decrease in demand because of this? Absolutely. And it's always important to remember that we can't just allocate restaurant food to grocery chains. There's different supply lines, there's different rules and regulations that go around the sale of these types of products. So to simply say, well, if it's not going to go to the restaurant, we'll send it to the grocery store, that can happen over time, but it's going to take a while. So I do think we're going to see an increase in supply at the producer level, and that's very unfortunate because that's going to drive down producer revenues a little bit. How that's going to play out, is this something we can eat our way out of like we did with BSE? That's something we're going to have to examine.
Now, Mark, when it comes to the dairy farmers and chicken and egg producers, how has the COVID-19 pandemic really impacted them?
From what I've been reading, the biggest impact so far, and the couple of people that I've talked to so far, has been again on the supply side. With the decrease in demand due to restaurants, that's reallocated the supply and demand model a little bit more. So we are seeing some milk get poured out. We've heard about that, and that's unfortunate. Do we expect to see this continue to the midterm and long term? Probably, and I think that's why we're seeing the federal government come in with $50 million for the Canadian Dairy Commission and others so they can help buy up excess supply. So hopefully over the next several months, we'll see a bit of a redistribution in the demand. We'll see restaurants open up, and then we'll see things return to a little bit of the normal. But is there going to be a pinch in the short term? Yes, there is.
Now, is the ag sector still dealing with a major labor shortage at this point? And if so, are there any solutions?
Well, that's a tough question because as long as I've been working with agriculture, there's always been a labor shortage. And so is this going to compound the issue? Absolutely. As I mentioned, we do have a fairly good border system in place right now, but as everybody's aware, people can't go across the border. So the temporary foreign workers that we've relied upon in the past are unable to arrive. And that's going to continue on until at least January the 21st. Then we have to see what quarantine measures, if any, are going to be in place after that. So now we're probably looking into July, which is getting halfway through the season. Thankfully, there are some programs that are coming into place. I know here in Alberta, the government has created a job connection program for agriculture to try and match up workers with employers. And they've also opened up a labor training program where there'll be a grant for employers to set up the infrastructure that they need in order to bring in new workers. So that's some of the positive side of things. But I do think we'll see a labor shortage here this year. One thing I did hear, and we'll wait to see if this is going to happen, is with the restaurants closing across Canada, about 800,000 people were immediately out of work. And with restaurants and other food services only opening up at partial capacity, will some of those workers, will some of the summer students, for example, look at farm work and agricultural work rather than working at a restaurant? Maybe we'll see some of that change, or some of those changes as well.
So Mark, big picture, how is our agriculture industry going to fare once this pandemic is over? Will it bounce back to normal, or do you think we'll see a significant number of farmers go bankrupt?
Well, I truly hope not. I remember BSE quite vividly, and being down in Lethbridge there with Feedlot Alley, that was something everybody was quite concerned about. And so when I look at the shock to the ag sector, there's some parallels here. Unfortunately, it's for the entire ag sector. And the industry itself survived it. My biggest concern is the individual producers. Now, as I mentioned before, there's some programs that can be taken advantage of at the FCC level. So I strongly encourage people to give FCC a call because they've opened up a couple $100 million in new loan dollars there, which is wonderful to see. I know AFSC is bringing in some programs, some interest relief programs right now. And I think it's also important to remember that we do have some things going for us. Our low Canadian dollar. Compared to the States, our goods and services up here are still going to be comparatively that much cheaper, so there's going to be more demand because of that. And also, we still have intergenerational lows on the interest rates. So if individuals do have to borrow, thankfully, with a prime rate of about 0.5% or 0.25% right now, borrowing, while always expensive, is still something that might be an option. So we are very concerned about that, obviously. When I look at the industry, I'm not worried about the industry. I'm worried about my friends and neighbors that are farmers, and hopefully they'll be able to manage it here this year.
Mark Fournier is an instructor at the Workland School of Agriculture Technology at Olds College. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.